He walked into that ballroom in a pressed dress uniform, shoulders squared, chin level, and the laughter started before he even reached the coat check. A decorated Navy veteran, a single father who hadn't slept a full night in 3 years. Standing alone in a room full of inherited wealth and designer contempt, holding an invitation he almost didn't accept. They saw a man out of place. They had no idea who they were laughing at, and neither did the most powerful woman in that room until she looked twice. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, don't leave without hitting that button. This one goes all the way. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday tucked between a water bill and a birthday card from his mother in Pensacola. Ethan Cole had stood at the kitchen counter still in his Navy issue undershirt, reading it twice before setting it down next to his daughter's cereal bowl. The Harrington Foundation Annual Gala. Black tie, Friday, April 14th. Waterfront Grand Ballroom, Charleston, South Carolina. Emma had looked up from her cereal and said, "What's that, Dad?" "Something I probably won't go to," he said. She was 9 years old and already had her mother's way of reading him. She tilted her head the way Rachel used to do when she knew he was lying to himself. "You should go," Emma said simply. "You never go anywhere." He opened his mouth to argue, but she had already gone back to her cereal as if the matter were settled. That was Emma. 11 words, and the conversation was over. Chief Petty Officer Ethan Cole had been stationed at Naval Station Charleston for 2 years, managing logistics and personnel operations for a submarine support unit that most civilians had never heard of and weren't supposed to know about. He was 38 years old, 6 feet even, with hands that had been cut and calloused in ways that no amount of washing ever quite fixed. He had 2 commendations on his record and 1 photograph on his desk. Emma at age 5, holding a fish she'd caught off the dock at his mother's house, grinning like she'd pulled up treasure. His life was divided into 2 modes: the job and his daughter. There was nothing else. There hadn't been anything else in 4 years, not since Rachel's car accident on I-26 on a rain-soaked November evening that Ethan had spent replaying in pieces he could never fully assemble. He didn't talk about Rachel much. He didn't talk about most things. His commanding officer, Captain Marcus Webb, had been the one to get him the invitation. Webb had connections to the Harrington Foundation through his wife's charity work, and he'd handed Ethan the envelope with a clap on the shoulder and a kind of deliberate nonchalance that Ethan recognized immediately as a setup. "It'll be good for you," Webb had said. "Get out of that apartment. Talk to somebody who isn't wearing a uniform." "I talked to Emma. Emma is 9. She's smarter than most of the adults I know." Webb had laughed, but his eyes hadn't. "Go, Ethan. That's not an order, but go." He had arranged for Mrs. Delgado next door to watch Emma for the evening. Emma had helped him iron his dress uniform with the focused seriousness of a surgeon standing on a step stool to reach his shoulders. She had straightened his medals herself, her small fingers precise and careful. "You look good, Dad," she said, stepping back to inspect him. "I look like I'm going to a military funeral." "You look distinguished." She said the word carefully, like she'd been saving it. He looked down at her. "Where'd you learn that word, library book?" She handed him his cover. "Don't be nervous." "I'm not nervous. You've been checking your watch every 4 minutes since lunch." He had no answer for that. He kissed the top of her head, told Mrs. Delgado he'd be back by 10, and drove his '09 Silverado to the Waterfront Grand Ballroom with the windows down because the air conditioning had been broken since January, and he hadn't gotten around to fixing it. He heard the ballroom before he saw it. The kind of music that cost money just to listen to live quartet, something classical he couldn't name. Through the tall glass doors he could see the shimmer of it, women in gowns that probably cost more than his monthly rent, men in tuxedos that fit like second skin. Champagne flutes catching the light. Laughter that was curated and practiced and had nothing to do with anything genuinely funny. He sat in his truck for a moment with the engine off. "You should go. You never go anywhere." He got out of the truck. The moment he walked through the door, he felt that shift in the room's atmosphere, subtle but unmistakable, the way a crowd adjusts to something unexpected. A man in a Navy dress uniform at a civilian gala was not quite the done thing. He wasn't unwelcome exactly. He just didn't belong in the way that everyone else in that room belonged, the effortless, inherited, unquestioned belonging of money. He took a glass of water from a passing tray he didn't drink at events where he was driving and made his way toward the edge of the room where the crowd was thinnest. He heard the first comment before he'd been standing there 5 minutes. It came from a cluster of men near the bar. 4 of them expensive suits. The kind of easy confidence that came from never having worried about a bill in their lives. One of them, tall with silver hair and a jaw like a news anchor, was looking directly at Ethan as he spoke to the others. "Someone let a soldier in," the man said, not particularly quietly. "Is this a veterans' charity now? Did I miss the memo?" The others chuckled. One of them glanced at Ethan, then away, the glance dismissive, in the particular way that dismissal from people who've never earned anything can be total, careless, thoughtless. Ethan said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that silence was not weakness. In the Navy, silence was sometimes the most precise weapon you had. He looked at the silver-haired man for exactly 3 seconds, the kind of steady, unflinching eye contact that said, "I heard you, and I am not afraid of you, and this conversation is already over." Then he looked away and took a sip of his water. The silver-haired man's smile thinned slightly. He turned back to his group, but the moment had been seen. A few people nearby had caught it, caught Ethan's stillness, his non-reaction, the complete absence of either shame or aggression. A couple of them looked quietly impressed. Most of them looked away. The silver-haired man's name Ethan learned from the program. Someone had pressed into his hand at the door was Preston Hawk, real estate developer, board member of 3 of the evening's sponsoring corporations, major donor to the Harrington Foundation. Preston Hawk, it turned out, was not done. 20 minutes later, Ethan was standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the harbor, watching the lights on the water, when he heard Hawk's voice again, closer this time, and addressed to a woman in a crimson dress who was laughing politely at something Hawk had said. "I'm serious," Hawk was saying. He came alone, no wife, no date, stood there in his little uniform, like he was waiting for a bus. I half expected him to ask if this was the USO. Another laugh from the group. "I respect the service, I do, but there's a dress code and a social code, you know what I mean. Some people just don't know where they belong." Ethan's jaw tightened. Not from shame. He had been through things Preston Hawk could not have survived a single day of. He had held men together under circumstances that would have broken someone like Hawk in the first hour. What tightened in his jaw was something colder and more controlled than anger. It was the recognition that this kind of contempt, the contempt of the safe and the comfortable, for the people who kept them safe, never changed. It was always there, wearing different suits in different rooms, speaking in the same voice. He set his water glass down on the nearest table and made a quiet decision to leave. He was reaching for his cover when he heard a different voice. "Preston?" One word. But the temperature in the immediate vicinity dropped about 10 degrees. Ethan turned slightly. The woman who had spoken was standing perhaps 8 feet from him, and she had not raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. Every person within earshot had gone still. She was somewhere in her early 40s, with dark hair pulled back in a way that looked effortless and was certainly not. She wore a midnight blue dress, no jewelry except for a single watch on her left wrist that Ethan's eye identified as simple, expensive, and chosen by someone who didn't need to show off. Her posture was the kind that came from discipline, not finishing school, spine straight, not because she'd been taught to stand that way, but because she had decided somewhere along the line that she would not fold for anyone. She was looking at Preston Hawk with an expression that was perfectly composed and absolutely devastating. "Do you know who that man is?" she said. Hawk blinked. He was used to controlling rooms. He was not used to this. "I'm sorry." "The man you've been making jokes about for the last 20 minutes. She didn't look at Ethan. She was still looking at Hawk. "Do you know who he is?" "I know, I don't think we've—" "Then you might want to be more careful," she said, "about what comes out of your mouth when you're in a room full of people you haven't been introduced to." A pause, precise and deliberate. "It tends to say more about you than it does about them." She held Hawk's gaze for a moment longer. Then she turned away from him with the kind of finality that made it clear the conversation had ended on her terms and not his, and she walked directly toward Ethan. He had not moved. He had watched the entire exchange with the same stillness he'd maintained all evening, and he was still standing exactly where he'd been, cover in his hand about 30 seconds from the door. She stopped in front of him. Up close, her eyes were a shade of gray that he associated with winter sky over open water. Not cold exactly, but clear. Measuring. "I apologize for that," she said. "You didn't do anything wrong," Ethan said. "No," she agreed. "But someone should apologize and he's not going to." She extended her hand. "Lydia Steele." He took it. Her grip was firm and direct. "Ethan Cole." "I know," she said. "Chief Petty Officer, Navy. Marcus Webb's unit." That caught him off guard, and he let it show because he had never seen the point of pretending to be harder to impress than he was. "You know Captain Webb. His wife sits on our board. He mentioned your name when we were putting together the guest list." A slight pause. "He spoke highly of you." "He's a good man," Ethan said. "Yes." She tilted her head fractionally. "You were leaving." "I was." "Why?" He considered several answers. He decided on the true one. "Because I've got a daughter at home, who's probably still awake, and I'd rather spend the rest of my evening with her than standing here being someone's punchline." Lydia Steele looked at him for a moment. A real look, not the social performance of attention, but actual attention. The kind where a person is genuinely processing what they've heard. "How old?" she said. 9. "Does she know you were going to leave?" "She told me to come in the first place." Something shifted in Lydia's expression. Not quite a smile, more like the approach of one considered and then held back. "Then you owe her at least another hour," she said. "Stay, talk to me. I promise I'm more interesting than Preston Hawk, and significantly less offensive." Against every instinct he had developed over 4 years of keeping himself contained and self-sufficient and unreachable, Ethan Cole said, "All right, bon night, all ishol." They found a quieter corner away from the main crowd, and they talked. It started as small talk, the kind of surface conversation that these events were designed to produce safe and forgettable. She asked about his work, in terms that were thoughtful and specific enough that he understood immediately she wasn't making polite noise. She had done some reading, or she had been paying attention, and he found himself answering with more detail than he usually gave civilians. She told him about the Harrington Foundation's work, education initiatives for underserved communities, infrastructure support for rural hospitals, veteran transition programs that she'd pushed hard to include over the objections of several board members who'd thought it wasn't on brand. "Why veterans?" he asked. "Because it was the gap nobody was filling well," she said. "And because I don't like gaps. You strike me as someone who doesn't like a lot of things being done badly." She glanced at him sideways. "Most people take longer to notice that." "Most people aren't paying attention," he said. Another one of those almost smiles. She was, he noticed, very careful with her expressions, not guarded exactly. She had said what she meant clearly and without softening from the moment she'd spoken to Hawk. But there was a layer between what she was feeling and what she showed, a layer she had built deliberately and kept maintained. He recognized that kind of construction because he had built the same thing just from different materials. She asked about Emma. He talked about his daughter the way he always did when someone asked, sincerely, simply, and with a kind of quiet pride that he didn't try to hide because there was no reason to. He told her about Emma's library habit, about the step stool she'd used to iron his uniform, about the 11 words she'd deployed to get him out of his apartment and into this room. Lydia listened. He realized, a genuinely exceptional listener. Not the kind that waited for their turn to speak, but the kind that absorbed who let what you said land before they responded. "She sounds like someone who knows her own mind," Lydia said. "She always has, since she was about 3. He paused. "She gets it from her mother." A beat of silence. He had not planned to say that. "You don't have to," Lydia started. "4 years ago," he said. "Car accident." He said it the way he always said it, clean and direct, because anything else made it into something that needed managing. "Emma was 5. She doesn't remember as much as she thinks she does, and she remembers more than she lets on." Lydia said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry." "Thank you." He meant it. He didn't always mean it when people said that. "She's doing well. Emma, she's remarkable." "She'd have to be," Lydia said quietly, "with the father she has." He looked at her. She was not performing the compliment. She meant it in the same direct, unadorned way she said everything, as a statement of observed fact. He found for the first time in a very long time that he did not know exactly what to say. An hour passed, the way it never had at events like this, without effort, without the sense that he was somewhere he was supposed to be enduring. They had moved from the foundation to her business. She spoke about it with precision and a sharp, almost impatient intelligence, naming problems she'd seen and the specific mechanics of how she'd solved them. She had built Steel Capital from a single investment thesis at 31 and had spent the last decade acquiring and restructuring companies in logistics, healthcare, infrastructure, and energy distribution. He knew the name. Most people with any financial awareness knew the name. He had not connected it when she introduced herself to the woman. Steel Capital, he had assumed a man. He did not say this. She did. "You didn't know who I was when I walked up to you, did you?" "No," he said. "Good," she said, and she meant it. "Why good?" "Because every person in this room who knows who I am talks to me differently than they'd talk to anyone else. You talk to me like I was a person. You are a person. Remarkable how often I have to remind people of that." He thought about what she'd said, the specific weight of it, what it implied about the texture of her days, the particular loneliness of a kind of power that made authentic contact nearly impossible. He thought about his own isolation built from grief and duty and the daily urgency of being both parents at once, and he recognized something in the shape of her solitude that rhymed with something in his own, even if the circumstances were entirely different. "This is going to sound like something I don't usually say," he told her. She waited. "I'm glad I didn't leave when I meant to." Lydia Steele looked at him for a long moment. The ballroom moved and gleamed around them, and Preston Hawke was holding court somewhere across the room, and none of it touched this particular corner where two people had, against all probability, had a genuine conversation. "So am I," she said. His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. Mrs. Delgado, a photo of Emma asleep on the couch, tucked under her favorite quilt, with her library book still in her hand. "She made me read 4 chapters before she went out. Quite the negotiator. Don't rush." He showed the photo to Lydia without quite meaning to. Lydia looked at it. Something in her face changed, not softened exactly, but opened the way a window opens to let something in. "She's beautiful," Lydia said. "Yeah." He looked at the photo a moment longer. "She is." He put the phone away. The evening had moved on without them noticing, and the ballroom had thinned out, and somewhere in the harbor, the lights on the water were doing what they always did, indifferent and quiet and constant. Ethan Cole, who had come to this room alone and been mocked for it, and had almost walked away from all of it, stood in the quiet of that corner and felt for the first time in longer than he could specifically remember, like something might be beginning rather than continuing to end. He didn't know what to do with that feeling yet. But for the first time in 4 years, He didn't immediately put it away. Emma had been right the way she usually was. He'd needed to go somewhere. He just hadn't known until now why. He called her 3 days later. He almost didn't. He had talked himself out of it twice, once on Saturday morning while Emma was at her soccer practice standing in the parking lot with his phone in his hand, and the number Lydia had written on the back of a foundation program card. And once on Sunday night, after Emma was asleep, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Both times he'd put the phone down and told himself the same thing. This is not your world, and she was being polite. And you are a Navy chief with a 9-year-old and a broken air conditioner, and nothing to offer a woman like that except complication. On Monday, he called anyway, because Emma had asked with the studied casualness that meant she'd been thinking about it since Friday. "Did you meet anyone interesting?" He had paused too long before answering. Emma had nodded once, satisfied, and gone back to her homework. He called from the parking lot of the base commissary because he needed to be somewhere he could walk away from if the call went sideways. It rang twice. "Ethan Cole," Lydia said instead of hello. Not a question, like she'd been expecting it. "You have caller ID," he said. "I have everything. How are you?" "Good. Emma's good." He stopped. "I'm calling because I'm not entirely sure why I'm calling." A pause. Then, "That's the most honest thing anyone's said to me in about 6 weeks. Keep going." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised him. "I wanted to say thank you for what you did Friday with Hawk. You would have handled it. I was handling it. What you did was different." "How?" He thought about it. "You made him feel it," he said. "I could have made him feel it too, but it would have cost something. The way you did it cost him everything, and you didn't spend a thing." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "That might be the most accurate description of how I operate that I've ever heard from someone who met me 48 hours ago. I pay attention. I noticed." Another pause, but not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that didn't need filling, which was unusual on a phone call with someone he barely knew. Most silences on phone calls with near strangers were just waiting dressed up as breathing. This one was something else. "I'd like to have coffee," she said. "If you're in the city this week." "I'm in the city every week. I work here." "Thursday morning, 7:30. There's a place on East Bay called Hendrix. Do you know it?" "I can find it." "Don't be late," she said. "I have a board call at 9 and I do not reschedule board calls." "I've never been late for anything in my life." "Good," she said. And she hung up. He stood in the commissary parking lot with his phone at his side and the sun coming through the windshields of 100 parked cars, and felt something he hadn't felt in so long that it took him almost a full minute to identify it. He felt curious about what came next. Hendrix was the kind of coffee shop that took its coffee seriously without being obnoxious about it. Dark wood, good light, the smell of something being roasted in the back. Lydia was already there when he arrived at 7:28, sitting at a corner table with a cup of black coffee and her phone face down on the table, which he noticed because most people of her particular professional urgency never put their phones face down. She looked different than she had at the gala. She was in a charcoal blazer, with the sleeves pushed up, her hair down, and she looked not less formidable exactly, but more specific, more real. The gala version of her had been polished to a high, deliberate shine. This version had edges. He sat down across from her. A server appeared and he ordered coffee black, and the server left. "You're 2 minutes early," Lydia said. "Early is on time," he said. "On time is late. Military. Also just how I am." She considered him. "How's Emma this morning?" "Suspicious," he said. "She wants to know who I'm having coffee with. I told her a business contact." "Is that what I am?" "I told her what I knew," he said. "Which is that you run a capital firm, and you know Captain Webb, and you didn't let Preston Hawk finish a sentence he had no business starting." She'll want a more complete answer eventually. Emma always does. He picked up his coffee when it arrived. She's 9 going on 45. She does not miss things. Lydia smiled, a real one this time, not the controlled near smile from Friday. It changed her face considerably. My mother used to say that about me, she said. Drove her crazy. Did it drive your father crazy too? The smile didn't disappear, but it settled, recalibrated. My father left when I was 11. After that, it was just my mother and me. She said it plainly, the way people say things they've had a long time to make peace with, but haven't entirely. She worked doubles at a hospital in Detroit for 8 years, so I could go to a decent school. She died before she saw any of it pay off. A pause. I think about that a lot. What she didn't get to see. What she didn't get to rest. She turned her cup slightly on its saucer. I built this company in part because I could not tolerate the idea that her sacrifice produced nothing. Which is probably not the healthiest motivation, but it's the honest one. He didn't offer a consolation because she hadn't asked for one and wouldn't have wanted it. What was her name? He asked instead. Lydia looked at him, that clear winter water look. Margaret, she said. Margaret Ann Steele. She kept my father's name because she said it was hers now, and she'd earned it and she wasn't giving it back. She sounds like someone worth remembering, right? Yes, Lydia said quietly. She does. They met for coffee 4 more times over the following 3 weeks. It was never planned beyond the immediate invitation. She'd send a text with a time and a place, or he'd call from the commissary parking lot again, or once from the parking lot of Emma's school, after a parent-teacher conference that had made him feel simultaneously proud and exhausted in the particular way that solo parenting could. Emma is exceptional. She is also negotiating with her teachers in ways that suggest she's read the school's disciplinary code. We'd love your input on directing that energy. Her 4th grade teacher had actually laughed while saying it, but Ethan had felt the familiar pull of being one person doing work that was supposed to be split 2 ways. He mentioned it to Lydia on the phone that evening. He hadn't planned to. It came out the way things sometimes did with her before the part of his brain that usually managed what he said could intercept it. Her teacher says she's negotiating policy with the administration, he said. Lydia was quiet for exactly 1 second. Good. It's a little alarming. It's extraordinary, Lydia said. She's 9, and she's already learned that systems have rules, and rules can be engaged with intelligently. Do you know how many adults never figure that out? A pause. What was the negotiation about? The school has a policy that library books can't be checked out over weekends. Emma submitted a written argument for a trial weekend lending program and cited 3 other district schools that already have one. Silence. Then, did it work? They're reviewing it. Lydia laughed. He had heard her laugh before, but this one was full and unguarded, and he found he wanted to hear it again. Ethan, your daughter is going to run something someday, something significant. I know, he said, and there was so much in those 2 words, pride and grief, and the particular ache of knowing Rachel was missing all of it, that he stopped talking for a second. Lydia heard it. She always heard the things under the things. You wish Rachel could see it, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't treat it like one. Every single day, he said. The 5th time they met, it was not coffee. She had called him on a Thursday afternoon with something different in her voice, not tense exactly, but taut, pulled close. Are you free tonight? I know it's short notice. I understand completely if... What happened? He said. A beat. Nothing dramatic. I just... She stopped. I had a meeting today with a man who used to be my business partner. It didn't go the way I'd planned, and I find that I would like to talk to someone who isn't on my payroll or on my board. You're the only person I know who fits that description. Give me an hour to get Emma settled, he said. Where are you? She gave him an address, her office building on Meeting Street. He called Mrs. Delgado, who said yes without needing details because she had long since understood that Ethan's requests were never frivolous, and drove downtown with his windows down and the evening coming in off the harbor. She was waiting outside the building, which surprised him. She had the look of someone who had been walking and had just stopped. Her blazer was off, folded over her arm, and she was standing on the sidewalk looking at something that wasn't there. He pulled over and she got in the truck without ceremony, and he noticed that she glanced at the cracked dashboard and the peeling edge of the passenger seat and said nothing about either of them. "Drive," she said. "Anywhere." He drove. Down toward the waterfront, up through the old neighborhood streets where the houses had been there since before either of them was born. He didn't ask what had happened yet. He'd learned that she talked when she was ready and not before, and that the space before she was ready was not empty. She was building toward something, organizing it, and interrupting that process helped no one. After about 10 minutes, she said, "His name is Daniel Farrow." He kept driving. "Your former partner. We built the company together for the first 3 years. He had the connections. I had the strategy. It worked because we trusted each other completely." She paused. "Or I thought we did." He waited. He was taking meetings with our anchor investors behind my back, representing himself as the decision-maker, laying groundwork to push me out of my own company. Her voice was level, but underneath the level there was something that had been compressed for a very long time under a great deal of weight. I found out from a junior analyst who didn't realize what he was telling me. Daniel had convinced most of the people around us that I was the talent, but he was the leadership. That I needed him to translate me to the real world. A pause. His word. Translate. "Like you were a foreign language," Ethan said. "Yes." The word came out stripped of everything but the truth of it. I handled it. I retained counsel. I called a board meeting. I had him removed within 60 days. The company survived. I rebuilt the investor relationships. By every measurable outcome, I won. She turned to look out the passenger window. But I have not trusted anyone fully since. And today, I had to sit across from him for a 3-hour mediation over a licensing dispute from 4 years ago. And I had to sit there and watch him perform sincerity. And She stopped. I couldn't tell Ethan. In that room today. For a moment, I genuinely could not tell if he was lying or telling the truth. And that frightened me more than anything he could have said. Because if I can't read it anymore, if I've become so defended that I can't see clearly, "You called me," he said. She turned from the window. "What?" "After a meeting that shook you, the person you wanted to talk to was someone who isn't paid to agree with you." He glanced at her. "That's not someone who can't read people clearly. That's someone who knows exactly what she needs." She was quiet. He turned the truck back toward the waterfront and parked where the harbor opened up and the lights came on one by one in the falling dark. "Tell me something," she said eventually, "and I want the honest answer, not the kind one." "Okay. Do you trust people?" "Still, after everything you've been through, losing Rachel, raising Emma alone, all the years of watching what people are really like under pressure, do you still trust?" He thought about it the way she'd asked him to, honestly, not kindly. "I trust slower now," he said. "I used to trust until someone gave me a reason not to. Now I watch first. But I still trust." He paused. "Emma taught me that. You can't raise a child on suspicion. They learn to read you faster than you learn to read them, and if all they read in you is guardedness, that's what they build in themselves. So I had to stay open. For her. And then, eventually, it stopped being just for her." Lydia was looking at him in a way that he was becoming familiar with, that full attention look, the one that meant she was not just hearing his words, but taking them apart and examining each piece. "Daniel Farrow made me believe that openness was naivety," she said quietly. "That trusting was the same as losing." "He was wrong," Ethan said. "Trusting the wrong person doesn't mean trust is the problem. It means Daniel Farrow was the problem." She looked at him for a long moment in the quiet of the truck with the harbor going dark outside. "You make it sound simple," she said, but not dismissively, more like she was trying on the simplicity and finding that it fit in places she hadn't expected. "It's not simple," he said. "It's just true."
Tish.
He drove her back to her building. She didn't get out right away. She sat for a moment with her hands in her lap, and he let the moment be what it was, neither of them in a hurry, neither of them pretending to be. "There's something I want to ask you," she said. "And I want you to know that no is a complete and sufficient answer, and it won't change anything. Ask. I'm restructuring the logistics division of a company I acquired 6 months ago. It's been underperforming because of management decisions that prioritized optics over function. I need someone with genuine operational expertise, someone who understands how complex systems fail and how to fix them from the inside without burning everything down." She paused. "I've been looking externally, and I keep coming back to the same problem, which is that the people I find either have the technical knowledge or the integrity, but not both." She looked at him directly. "I don't want to hire you because of how I feel about this." She gestured briefly between them. "Whatever this is. I want to hire you because I watched you stand in a room full of people who were trying to make you small, and you were the largest person there. And I need that." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I have a contract with the Navy." "I know. I'm talking about when that ends. 8 months, according to Marcus Webb." He looked at her. "You talked to Captain Webb about my contract." "I talked to Captain Webb because I wanted to know if you were the person I thought you were, and I didn't want to ask you directly because that felt presumptuous." She held his gaze. He said, and I am quoting directly, "Ethan Cole is the best man I have in this unit, and losing him is going to hurt, but holding him back from something he's built for would be worse." A pause. "So, 8 months. Think about it. That's all I'm asking." He should have said he'd think about it. He should have been cautious and measured and careful the way he'd taught himself to be. Instead, he said, "What's the company?" Something shifted in her expression. Not triumph, not even satisfaction. Something quieter. Relief maybe, as if she'd been more afraid of asking than she'd let herself acknowledge. "Meridian Freight," she said. "Mid-size regional carrier. Good bones, poor management. Loses about $4 million a quarter because of routing inefficiencies that should have been fixed 2 years ago." "I've heard of them," he said. "They had a union dispute in 2021, handled it badly." She tilted her head. "You know freight logistics." "I've been managing submarine support logistics for the United States Navy for 6 years," he said. "I know how to move things in complicated places under pressure." She looked at him steadily. "Yes," she said. "I know." He drove home with the windows down, the night coming in off the harbor. Mrs. Delgado had left the kitchen light on. Emma was asleep, her library book on the nightstand, her soccer cleats by the door, where she always left them, instead of in the closet where they belonged. He stood in the door of her room for a moment, watching her sleep, the absolute and trusting sleep of a child who believed completely that her father had things handled. He thought about Lydia's voice when she described Daniel Farrow. The particular kind of wound that comes not from being defeated, but from being misread, from having someone look at what you are and deliberately see something smaller. He thought about 8 months. He thought about Emma on a step stool, straightening his medals, with her precise and careful hands, telling him he looked distinguished. He turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. And for the first time in a long time, what he was thinking about when he closed his eyes was not the past. It was the particular vertiginous, terrifying sensation of something worth moving toward. The 8 months did not pass slowly. That was the thing about having a life that was already full-time, moved differently. There was no empty space for anticipation to stretch itself out in. There was Emma's soccer season and her library campaign, which the school board eventually approved on a 6-week trial basis, a victory Emma received with the composed satisfaction of someone who had never genuinely doubted the outcome. There were Ethan's final months of active duty, the particular texture of an ending that was also a beginning, the strange doubled feeling of closing something that had defined him for 16 years. There were mornings and evenings, and the ordinary machinery of a life being lived and threaded through all of it, with increasing frequency and weight, was Lydia. She called more than he expected. Not constantly, she was not that kind of person, and neither was he, but consistently, with a regularity that began to feel less like a coincidence and more like a decision she had made without announcing it. Tuesday evenings usually, sometimes a Thursday morning if her board call ran short. Once on a Sunday afternoon, when Emma was at her grandmother's in Pensacola, she called, and they talked for 2 hours about nothing that mattered and everything that did. He did not examine it too closely. He had learned raising Emma that some things grew better when you didn't hover over them. You made the conditions right, and you paid attention, and you let what was going to happen at its own pace. Forcing it only made it small. Captain Webb noticed. He was, after all, paid to notice things. "You're different," Webb said one afternoon in March, leaning back in his office chair with the particular economy of movement of a man who had spent 30 years being physically comfortable in uncomfortable situations. "Different how?" Ethan said. "Less like a closed door." Webb picked up his coffee mug and looked at it. "Steel Capital called my office again. Her assistant wanting to confirm some paperwork timing for after your separation." He glanced up. "You didn't tell me you'd actually said yes." "I said I'd think about it." "Her assistant is scheduling onboarding. That's past thinking." Ethan had at some point between November and February stopped thinking of it as Lydia's offer and started thinking of it as the next thing. He couldn't pinpoint exactly when the shift had happened. It had arrived the way most real decisions arrived, not in a single moment of clarity, but in the accumulated weight of many smaller moments that eventually made the outcome obvious. "Meridian Freight has the right problem," he said. "It's a logistics failure, not a market failure. The bones are good, I know how to fix it. And it doesn't hurt that your new employer is. My relationship with Lydia Steele has nothing to do with this decision," Ethan said. The firmness in his voice was not defensiveness, it was precision. Webb studied him. "No," he said after a moment. "I don't think it does." He set his mug down. "That's actually what I wanted to hear." He told Emma in April, 2 months before his separation date. He had thought carefully about how to frame it. What to say. How much to explain, how to handle the questions she would certainly ask. He had prepared for several different versions of the conversation. Emma characteristically made all of his preparation irrelevant. She listened to him explain about the Navy contract ending, about Meridian Freight, about the new position, and then she said, "Is this because of Lydia?" He had been sitting across from her at the kitchen table. He paused. "It's because of the job." "But Lydia offered you the job." "Yes. And you like Lydia." He held her gaze. Emma had her mother's eyes, brown, direct, the kind that didn't look away from things. "I respect Lydia very much," he said carefully. Emma absorbed this with the expression she used when she felt she was being given the accurate but incomplete version of something. "Dad, I'm 9, not 4. "I know how old you are." "Then just tell me." He looked at his daughter. He thought about what Lydia had said months ago. She sounds like someone who knows her own mind. He thought about what it had cost him to stay closed, the years of it, and what it had started to cost Emma to grow up with a father who modeled careful distance as the appropriate response to anything that mattered. "I like her," he said. "I like who I am when I talk to her. And that hasn't happened in a long time." He paused. "That's not why I took the job, but it's true." Emma considered this with the seriousness she applied to everything she deemed worth considering. Then she nodded once slowly, as if approving a proposal that had met her conditions. "When do I get to meet her?" "That's not," he started and then stopped, because the question was fair and the only honest answer was soon. His last day at Naval Station Charleston was a Friday in June. There was a small ceremony, quieter than some he'd seen, which was how he'd requested it. Webb shook his hand with both of his and said, Don't make me regret this. And Ethan understood that he meant, don't disappear. Emma was there in a yellow dress, standing very straight. And when they pinned the final commendation to his uniform, she watched with the same focused attention she gave to things she wanted to remember. On the drive home, she said, "Are you scared?" "Of what?" "The new job. Not being in the Navy." He thought about lying. He thought about the confident reassurance a parent was supposed to offer. He said, "A little, yes." Emma nodded. "Good," she said. "Mrs. Patterson says the only people who aren't scared are the ones who don't care enough to understand what they're doing." "Mrs. Patterson is your fourth-grade teacher." "She's very wise." He almost laughed. "Yeah," he said. "I think so too." He started at Meridian Freight the following Monday. Lydia had arranged for him to meet the full operations leadership team. On his first day, 14 people in a conference room that had the particular feeling of a space where difficult conversations had been avoided for too long. He walked in, and he read the room the way he'd learned to read spaces aboard ships, who sat near the door, who kept eye contact, who was performing confidence they didn't have, who was genuinely waiting to see what happened next. The operations director, a man named Garrett Sims, who'd been with Meridian for 11 years, introduced himself with a handshake that communicated exactly what he thought of outside appointments, with no freight industry experience, being inserted above his team's head. The handshake was firm, in the way that firm can mean, "I am not happy about this," rather than "I respect you." "Welcome to Meridian," Sims said. "I'll be honest with you, the team has some concerns about this transition." "Tell me the concerns," Ethan said. Sims blinked. He had expected diplomacy. "I'm sorry. Tell me the concerns. All of them. Right now in this room." Ethan looked around the table. "I'm not here to tell you how things work in the Navy and apply them wholesale to freight logistics. I'm here because there are systems in this company that are failing, and I know how to look at failing systems. But I can't see what you don't show me. So tell me what I'm walking into." There was a silence. Then, from the far end of the table, a young woman named Dana Reyes, who handled routing analysis, said, "The dispatch software hasn't been updated in 4 years. The vendor we contracted for the upgrade went under in 2022, and the replacement process stalled in procurement. We're running every regional route on a system that doesn't talk to our current fleet GPS." She paused. "We've been doing manual reconciliations every day, 12 people. How much time does that cost?" "About 4 hours daily per coordinator." He looked at Sims. Sims had the expression of a man who knew the answer and had been furious about it for a long time and had not been listened to. "How long has this been flagged?" Ethan asked. 18 months, Sims said. "And the previous management response?" "Quarterly reviews, assurances that procurement was active. Nothing." Sims crossed his arms, but the gesture was less hostile now and more exhausted. "We've been held together with duct tape and people working 60-hour weeks because they believe in this company, even when the company's leadership didn't believe in them." Ethan held Sims's gaze. "I hear that," he said. "And for what it's worth, that's going to change." He looked at Dana. "Get me everything you have on the software situation by end of day. The vendor history, the procurement trail, the current workarounds. All of it." She had it to him by 3 o'clock. He spent the rest of the afternoon in his office reading, annotating, rebuilding the picture of how a company had come apart, not from market forces or bad luck, but from management that had prioritized looking functional over being functional. He called Lydia at 5:15. "Day 1, she said. "How bad?" "Manageable," he said. "But I need authorization to move fast on the software replacement. The procurement process that's been running is too slow and too risk-averse for how much this is costing in labor hours." "What do you need?" "Budget approval by end of week, and the authority to go directly to 2 vendors I've already identified without running the full RFP process. The RFP would take 6 months. We don't have 6 months." A pause. Send me the numbers tonight. Already writing them up. Another pause, different in quality. Ethan? Yeah. You walked in there today and they told you everything, didn't they? Things they haven't told anyone in 18 months. They told me because I asked directly and I didn't flinch when they answered. Most executives flinch, she said quietly. I know. He thought about what Sims had looked like, that exhausted, long-denied fury, and felt something that was both professional and personal about it, the recognition of a man who had held things together through sheer personal commitment while being failed by the structure above him. Your operations director is good, he said. He's been frustrated into a defensive crouch, but he's good. He's been fighting for his team with no tools and no support. Give him something to work with and he'll deliver. Lydia was quiet for a moment. You've been there one day? I pay attention fast. Yes, she said. You do. Good. The software authorization came through in 4 days. In the 5th week, Ethan and Dana had rebuilt the routing protocol framework. In the 8th week, the manual reconciliation hours dropped by 60%. Sims, who had started their working relationship with crossed arms and careful reserve, had by week 6 begun stopping by Ethan's office in the mornings with coffee and the overnight data reports, not because he'd been asked to, but because he'd discovered that Ethan actually read them, actually engaged with them, actually came back with questions that showed he'd thought about what the numbers meant at the human level. You've done this before, Sims said one morning, setting the reports on Ethan's desk. Not freight logistics, but this, taking something apart to find where it's bleeding. Submarine support logistics, Ethan said. When a resupply chain fails 300 feet underwater, you don't have the option of waiting for the next quarterly review. Sims sat down across from the desk. What made you leave the Navy? Ethan looked at him. Combination of things. The offer from Steele. The right problem at the right time, Ethan said. The offer gave me a direction. The problem was already interesting. Sims nodded slowly. Then, with the careful precision of a man raising something he'd been thinking about for a while. What's she like, Steele? I've seen her twice, both times from across a room. She's... He stopped choosing words. She's not what I expected. When I heard Steele Capital was acquiring us, I expected someone who'd come in, strip the assets, and move on. That's the pattern. She's not the pattern, Ethan said. No. Sims picked up his coffee cup. She's building something, you can tell. People who are stripping don't fix dispatch software. A beat. Why Meridian? There are easier companies to restructure. Ethan thought about Lydia at her kitchen table. No. He'd never been to her house. He thought about Lydia in his truck, hands in her lap, saying I had to sit there and watch him perform sincerity. He thought about what she'd said about her mother, about the hospital doubles, about building a company out of grief converted to purpose. Because it has good bones, he said. And she respects good bones. They had dinner for the first time in July, 7 months after the gala. It was not a date in the sense that neither of them had called it that. Emma was with Ethan's mother for the week. Lydia had suggested a restaurant downtown that Ethan had never been to, not expensive in a performative way, just genuinely good, the kind of place where the food was the point. They sat at a small table near the back, and they talked about Meridian for approximately 12 minutes before they stopped talking about Meridian. She talked about a board meeting that had gone badly, where 2 of the male members had spent 40 minutes explaining her own company's financial position to her. He watched her describe it, the particular control it took to sit in that room and not demonstrate that she knew more in her left hand than both of them knew combined, because demonstrating it would have been called aggression and silence was called weakness, and there was no acceptable register for her to occupy that they hadn't already pre-decided was wrong. How do you handle it? He asked. I win, she said simply. Eventually and completely. I make sure the outcomes are so undeniable that the narrative has to follow. She turned her wine glass by the stem. But I am very tired of the interim. The interim where you know and they don't believe you yet. Yes. He looked at her. I believed you from the second sentence, he said. At the gala, when you turned around and said his name, I knew exactly what kind of person you were. She looked at him with that full attention quality. What kind is that? The kind who does the work and then has to spend energy proving she did the work. He paused. It's exhausting. I've seen it. Not the same as what you're describing, but I've watched people fight to be seen as what they already are. It takes something out of them that they don't get back. Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then, does it take something out of me? I think, he said carefully, that it's made you very careful. And carefulness that's been forced on you by other people's failures isn't the same as carefulness you chose. One protects you. The other just costs you. She looked at him for a long time. The restaurant moved around them other conversations, soft clinking the ordinary ambient sound of a room full of people having a Tuesday evening. None of it touched their table. Daniel told me once, she said slowly, that my instincts were my liability. That I moved too fast, trusted too much committed before I had full information. She set the wine glass down. And after he betrayed me, I thought he'd been right all along, that my instincts had failed me. Your instincts didn't fail you, Ethan said. They built a company. He failed you. He held her gaze. There's a difference. She looked at him steadily. Her expression had the quality he'd noticed in the truck in November that opening, that specific shift that happened when she let herself take something in rather than process it from a distance. I've been thinking about Emma, she said then, with the slight shift in tone that meant she was moving carefully. You said she wanted to meet me. She did. Do you want her to meet me? He thought about how to answer that honestly. I want to be sure that if she meets you, it means something real. Emma doesn't do casual. Once she decides someone matters, she goes all in. She's 9. She doesn't have the mechanisms yet to protect herself from caring too much. He paused. I won't introduce her to something that might not last. Lydia absorbed this. That's the right answer, she said quietly. But I think it might last, he said. The words came out without premeditation, without the usual process of examining them before release. They came out because they were true, and because sitting across from her in this particular restaurant on this particular Tuesday evening, the distance between what he felt and what he said had finally compressed to nothing. She looked at him for a long moment. Her hand was on the table. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. But they both knew that the table between them had gotten smaller. I think so too, she said. Manged, he drove home through the summer night with the windows down and the city going past, and he thought about Garrett Sims saying you've done this before, taking something apart to find where it's bleeding. He thought about the dispatch software and the 60-hour weeks, and the people who'd held Meridian together with commitment and no support, and how the work of the last 3 months had been fundamentally the same work. Whether the system was logistics or something between two people you found, where it was failing, you named it clearly, you didn't flinch, and then you did what was needed to rebuild it from the honest place. He thought about Emma on a step stool straightening his medals. He thought about Lydia's mother, Margaret Ann Steele, who worked doubles at a Detroit hospital for 8 years and never got to rest. He thought about the gala in November and Preston Hawk's voice and the laughter that had started before he reached the coat check, and how from the outside that evening had looked like the worst possible version of itself, a man alone in a room that didn't want him, and how it had been quietly and without announcement, the beginning of everything that mattered. He pulled into his driveway and sat with the engine off. He had been building a life for 4 years that was safe and sufficient and sealed against disruption. He had done it for Emma because Emma needed stability, but also for himself because stability had been the only way he knew to hold the grief without being destroyed by it. He had built walls the same way Lydia had built walls from different materials, after different injuries, but with the same fundamental purpose, to make sure nothing else could reach him before he was ready. He wasn't sure when ready had happened. He wasn't sure it was a moment rather than a direction. But driving home through Charleston in the July heat with Lydia's voice still in his ears, "I think so too," he understood that whatever wall he'd been standing behind had not so much come down as become unnecessary. He went inside. The apartment was quiet. He checked Emma's room out of habit, even though she wasn't there. The bed made the cleats by the door, the library books stacked with the spines aligned, because Emma, even at 9, had strong opinions about how books should be treated. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and sent a single text. "I want Emma to meet you. When you're ready." Lydia's reply came 4 minutes later, and it said exactly what he'd expected it to say, and nothing extra, because she was precise. And he had come to love that about her. The economy of it. The way she said what she meant and meant what she said all the way down. It said, "Saturday. I know a good park." Saturday arrived the way important days sometimes did, unremarkably with ordinary weather, and no signal from the universe that anything was about to shift. Emma had known something was happening since Thursday. She hadn't asked directly, which meant she had already worked it out, and was waiting to see if Ethan would confirm what she suspected. This was one of her tactics Patience deployed as pressure, letting the silence do the work. He had recognized it since she was 6 years old, and had never found a reliable counter for it. He told her Friday evening after dinner while she was helping him clear the table. "We're meeting someone tomorrow," he said. "At Waterfront Park, around 10. Emma set 2 plates on the counter. "Lydia," she said, not a question. "Yes." She turned around. Her expression was not the excitement he'd half expected, nor the wariness he'd half feared. It was something more considered than either the look she got when she was taking a measurement. "Why now?" she said. He had prepared for several questions. That was not one of them. "What do you mean? You've known her since November. That's 8 months. Why now and not before?" He looked at his daughter. "Because I wanted to be sure it was the right time." "Sure for who?" "For you," he said. "Mostly for you." She processed this. Then, "What if I don't like her?" "Then that matters," he said. "And we'll talk about it." "What if I do like her?" "Then that matters too." Emma turned back to the sink. She ran the water, rinsed a plate with the precise efficiency she brought to domestic tasks she considered worth doing correctly. Without turning around, she said, "Does she know what to expect from me? I told her you're exceptional and that you negotiate with your school board and that you don't do small talk." A pause. "Good," Emma said. "I don't like when adults pretend with kids, like we can't tell." "I know." "Okay." She finished rinsing the plate. 10 o'clock. Lydia was there when they arrived, sitting on a bench with her phone in her jacket pocket and her hands in her lap. She was wearing jeans and a simple navy blouse, and Ethan noticed this in the specific way he'd learned to notice the things she chose. This was not the Lydia of board meetings or charity galas. This was a deliberate choice toward ordinariness, and it cost her something, the effort of it, and she'd made it anyway. She stood when she saw them. Emma walked slightly ahead, the way she sometimes did in situations she'd decided to take initiative in. She stopped in front of Lydia and looked up at her with the direct, unceremonious attention she gave to everything she was genuinely evaluating. "I'm Emma," she said. "I know," Lydia said. "I'm Lydia." "I know," Emma said. A beat. "My dad talks about you." Lydia glanced at Ethan. He offered nothing, because there was nothing to offer. This was Emma's territory now, and intervening would only make it worse. "What does he say?" Lydia asked. Emma considered the question with visible seriousness. "He doesn't say a lot, but he checks his phone more than he used to, and he irons his shirts on Thursdays now, even when he doesn't have anything official." Lydia's expression did something then that Ethan had only seen a handful of times. It went entirely unguarded just for a second before she recovered. It was not quite a smile. It was the thing that came before one, the moment before a person decides it's safe to show what they're feeling. He irons his shirts on Thursdays, she repeated. He says it's habit, Emma said. But he didn't do it before November. Lydia looked at Ethan. November, she said. She notices things, Ethan said. I can see that. Lydia looked back at Emma. Your father tells me you convinced your school to start a weekend library lending program. Emma straightened slightly, not with pride exactly, but with the quiet confidence of someone who'd done a thing correctly and was prepared to stand behind it. The policy didn't make sense. Books shouldn't stop being available because it's a weekend. People have more time to read on weekends. How did you make the case? I found 3 other schools in the district that already had the program, wrote up a comparison, submitted it to the principal, and CC'd the district curriculum coordinator. A pause. My dad taught me that when you want something changed, you give the decision maker everything they need to say yes and nothing they can use to say no. Lydia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, He taught you well. He taught me most things, Emma said, and the simplicity of it, the complete and uncomplicated love in it, made Ethan look away for a second, at the middle distance, at nothing in particular, because some things were too large to look at directly. Awed, they walked. Emma positioned herself between them, with the naturalness of a child who had made a strategic decision, and was executing it without drawing attention to the strategy. She asked Lydia questions with the methodical thoroughness of a job interview conducted by someone who had not yet learned that job interviews were supposed to be subtle. She asked what Lydia's company did. Lydia explained it plainly without condescension, and Emma followed up with a question about what happened to the people who worked at companies when they got restructured and whether they lost their jobs, and Lydia said sometimes yes and sometimes no, and that the goal was always to find the version of the answer that kept the most people whole, and that it wasn't always possible, but it was always the aim. Emma appeared to find this acceptable. She asked whether Lydia had any children. Lydia said no. Emma asked if she'd wanted them. There was a fractional pause. Ethan saw it, and Lydia said, I thought about it differently at different times in my life. Right now, I'm not sure the question has a simple answer. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied by the honesty of this, and moved on. She asked how Lydia had met Ethan, and Ethan said, At that gala in November I told you about it. And Emma said, You said you met a business contact. And the look she cut sideways at him was so precisely her mother's look, that particular blend of patience and mild devastation, that Ethan had to press his lips together to keep something under control. He was being careful, Lydia said to Emma, without looking at Ethan. He didn't know yet what I was going to turn out to be. Emma considered this. What did you turn out to be? Lydia looked at Ethan then, and the look was the kind that people exchanged when they had an answer that needed to be said in the right register, and they were still working out which one. Someone who was glad he stayed, she said. Emma absorbed this. Then she looked up at Lydia with the directness that was her most consistent characteristic. Are you going to be around? She asked. Not just for the job stuff, like actually around. The question landed in the air between all 3 of them. It was the real question, the one under all the other questions, stripped of everything except what it was a 9-year-old asking a woman to tell her the truth about permanence, because she had already learned at an age when she should not have had to that people could be there and then not be there, and that the afterward lasted forever. Lydia did not answer quickly. She did not fill the silence with reassurance before she'd earned the right to offer it. She stood with the question for a moment, and Ethan watched her, and felt something close to reverence for the way she was doing this, carefully honestly, without the condescension of easy promises. I want to be, Lydia said. I can't promise you what happens down the road, because I don't know, and I think you're too smart for me to pretend otherwise. But I can tell you that when I decide something matters, I don't let it go easily. And you and your dad, she paused. You matter. That's the truest answer I have. Emma looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded once with the gravity of a formal decision made. Okay, she said. And she started walking again. Ethan fell into step beside Lydia. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. She glanced at him, and he glanced at her, and the entire exchange took less than 2 seconds and communicated everything that a longer conversation would have taken apart and made smaller. They stopped for ice cream. Emma had strong opinions about ice cream, which were that there were 2 acceptable flavors, and that people who chose anything artificially colored were operating on compromised judgment. She expressed this view to the teenager at the counter with such earnest conviction that the teenager looked slightly stunned. Lydia ordered the same thing Emma ordered, which Emma noticed and filed. They sat outside. Emma ate with the systematic focus she brought to things she enjoyed. Lydia and Ethan talked around her, not over her. The difference being that around her meant she was included when she had something to say, and free not to be when she was thinking, whereas over her would have meant she was invisible, and Emma was never invisible. Lydia mentioned the Meridian routing system and a board presentation she'd given on the quarterly numbers. Ethan said the second quarter projection was probably still conservative. Emma said without looking up from her ice cream, "What's Meridian?" They both looked at her. Ethan explained freight company routing logistics, the software problem that had been costing time and money and that they'd been fixing for 3 months. Emma listened and then said, "Is this what you do now instead of the Navy?" "Yes." "Do you like it?" He thought about the first morning in that conference room, the crossed arms and the careful reserve, Garrett Sims's exhausted fury, Dana Reyes, and the 4-year-old software. He thought about the problem of it, the specific pleasure of a problem that had a real shape you could get your hands around. "Yeah," he said. "I do." Emma looked at Lydia. "Did you know he'd be good at it?" "I thought he would be," Lydia said. "I wasn't 100% certain." "What made you think so?" "Because I watched him handle something difficult in a way that most people don't." She glanced at Ethan. He didn't react the way people usually react when they're being dismissed. He stayed still. He stayed himself. People who can do that under pressure can usually do anything that requires clear thinking. Emma went back to her ice cream. After a moment she said, "He's like that at home too." "I know," Lydia said. "Most people get louder when things are hard," Emma said. "He gets quieter, but it's not the same as not being there. He's more there." She frowned at her cone, thoughtful. "It took me a while to figure that out. When I was little, I thought quiet meant he was somewhere else. But he was always there. He was just very in it." Ethan looked at his daughter. He had not known she'd had to learn that. He had not known she'd noticed it as something to learn. He felt a shifting interior thing that he did not have a precise word for. Not guilt, not quite, but the specific tenderness of understanding that the people you love are also navigating you, working out the language of who you are, and doing that work quietly and without asking to be thanked for it. "Emma," he said. She looked at him. "I didn't know you'd figured that out." She shrugged with one shoulder, the way she did when something was more significant than she wanted it to look. "I'm very observant," she said. "You are," he said. She went back to her ice cream. Lydia looked at the middle distance and said nothing, and her saying nothing was the most respectful thing she could have done with the moment. The drive home was quieter. Emma sat in the back seat and read. She had brought a book, because Emma never went anywhere without a book, which was something Ethan had long since stopped remarking on. He drove. After about 10 minutes, Emma lowered her book. "I like her," she said. He checked the rear view. Emma had gone back to her book. The verdict had been delivered, and the matter was apparently closed. He kept his eyes on the road and did not say anything for a moment. "Good," he said finally. "She doesn't pretend," Emma said without looking up. "Most adults pretend with kids, like they're performing being interested. She was actually interested." A page turn. And she answered the question about permanence honestly. She didn't just say yes. If she'd just said yes, I would have known she was telling me what she thought I wanted to hear. "I know." "She's scared of something," Emma said then. Ethan glanced back. What makes you say that? The way she held her cup at the bench before we got there. She was sitting like she was bracing. Emma's eyes were still on her book. Like how you sit before something you're not sure about, but you've decided to do anyway. He drove. The city moved past the windows and Emma read, and he thought about Lydia on that bench, hands in her lap, phone in her pocket, and the decision she had made to show up as ordinary, as reachable, as someone who could be evaluated honestly, and stood the evaluation. He thought about what it cost her. The woman who had built Steel Capital from a single thesis at 31, who had removed Daniel Farrow from her own boardroom in 60 days, who had crossed a ballroom to defend a man she didn't know, because the alternative was allowing a small cruelty to continue unchallenged. That woman had sat on a park bench in jeans and waited to be vetted by a 9-year-old, and she'd done it without armor, without strategy, without anything but the truth. "Yeah," he said quietly. She was scared. Emma looked up from her book. "Did she know you could tell?" "I think so." "Good," Emma said. "That means she trusted you." She went back to her book. "That's important." He called Lydia that evening after Emma was asleep. She picked up on the second ring. "How is she?" she said, and the way she asked it, no preamble, just that, told him everything about what the afternoon had cost her and what it had meant. She said, "You don't pretend," he said. A silence. Then, "That's..." He could hear her recalibrating. "How does she feel, actually?" "She told me in the car. She likes you." A beat. "She also said you were scared, and that she thought that was good, because it meant you trusted me." A long silence. Long enough that he waited it out without filling it. "She's extraordinary," Lydia said, and her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. A roughness, a realness, the sound of someone who has been moved past their own management. "She is," he said. "She gets it from her mother. And I'm starting to think from the people I bring around her." Another silence. This one different, closer, warmer. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah, I want to tell you something. And I want to say it straight, because I don't know how to say it any other way." She paused. "I have been managing my life for a very long time. Everything I do deliberately. I plan for outcomes. I don't let things happen to me. I make decisions and then I execute them." Another pause. "What's happening here?" And he understood that here meant all of it, the gala and the truck and the coffee and the dinners, Emma on the bench and the ice cream, the Thursday shirts. "I didn't plan this. I looked up one day and it was already true. And I don't know how to hold something I didn't build on purpose." "Lydia," he said. "I'm not finished." "Okay, I'm scared," she said. "Not the kind of scared that means I want to stop. The other kind. The kind where the thing you're scared of losing is something you didn't realize you needed until you had it." Her voice was steady, but it was the steadiness of effort, not of ease. "I don't say things I don't mean. I don't make statements I'm not prepared to stand behind. So when I tell you that this matters to me, you, Emma, what we're building, I need you to know I'm not saying it because it's the right time or the right context. I'm saying it because it's true, and I'm done managing the distance between what's true and what I say." He sat with it for a moment, the full weight of what she'd just done, the cost of it for a woman who had spent years building the mechanisms to make sure nothing reached her before she'd approved it. "Lydia," he said. "What?" "I ironed my shirt last Thursday, and there was nothing on my calendar." A beat. 2. Then she laughed, that full, unguarded laugh, the one he'd heard for the first time, when he'd told her about Emma and the library program, the one that changed everything about her face and made her entirely, completely real. "Ethan Cole," she said. "Yeah. I'm glad Preston Hawk is an idiot." He leaned back in his chair. "So am I," he said. "So am I." 3 weeks later, everything that had been quietly building came to a head in a way that neither of them had planned for, in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Steel Capital offices. Ethan had been called into a full board meeting. Not unusual, he'd attended several since joining Meridian, but this time, the room had a different composition. 3 of the original board members, including a man named Victor Hale, who had been skeptical of the Meridian acquisition from the start, had apparently decided that 3 months of operational improvement were insufficient evidence, and that the appropriate response was to question the hire. Ethan had not been told this before the meeting. He walked in, expecting a quarterly update, and found instead a room that had already taken sides. Hale opened without preamble. "Mr. Cole, we've reviewed the Q3 operational data. The improvements are acknowledged. However, the board has concerns about the pace of capital expenditure for the software transition and whether the long-term projections justify the short-term spend." Ethan set his materials on the table. "What specific projections concern you?" "The 4-year ROI model your office submitted last month." "What's your concern with it?" Hale glanced at 2 of the other members, a glance that communicated this is the part where he gets defensive. "The assumptions underlying the labor hour savings are optimistic. They're based on 8 weeks of actual data," Ethan said. "Not projections. Documented, audited actuals." He looked around the table. "I can walk through each assumption line by line if you'd like. I have the source data." Hale shifted. "That's not necessary. The board is simply—" "I think it is necessary," Ethan said. "Not aggressively, steadily. Because the word optimistic is being applied to numbers that aren't estimates, and I'd rather spend 40 minutes on the data than leave this room with a misunderstanding about what Meridian's operations actually look like." From the far end of the table, Lydia said, "Walk us through it." She had been silent since the meeting opened. She sat at the head of the table with the particular stillness he'd come to know, not absence, but concentration, the quality of attention she gave to situations she was allowing to develop before she acted. He walked them through it. 42 minutes, every line, every assumption sourced to documented evidence. He was not performing confidence. He had the numbers, and the numbers were unambiguous, and he presented them the way he'd presented operational data in the Navy, clearly, completely without decoration. When he finished, the room was quiet. Hale said, "I'll need to review the source documentation." "It's already been sent to your assistant," Ethan said. "As of this morning." Another silence. Lydia looked at Hale. "Victor," she said, "do you have any remaining questions for Mr. Cole?" Hale did not. He did not look happy about not having any, but he did not have any. "Thank you, Ethan," Lydia said. He gathered his materials and left. In the hallway outside the conference room, he stood for a moment with his materials under his arm, and the particular feeling of a thing that had been tested and had held. Not relief exactly, more like the quiet of after. His phone buzzed. A text from Lydia from inside the meeting room she was still in. "Victor Hale has been questioning this acquisition for 8 months. He's never been more wrong. You just showed him 20 different ways." He typed back. "Did it land?" Her reply came in 30 seconds. The 3 board members who've been on the fence about the acquisition just voted to approve the next phase of capital investment. Full authorization. A pause indicated by the 3 dots, and then it landed. He put the phone in his pocket. Garrett Sims was waiting for him by the elevator, which meant someone had told Sims there was a board meeting, and Sims had come to the building anyway, because Sims had been fighting for Meridian for 11 years, and old habits did not die on command. "How'd it go?" Sims said. "Full authorization," Ethan said. "Next phase." Sims let out a breath. Not dramatic. Just real, the sound of a man who had been holding something a long time and had just been told he could put it down. "You know," he said after a moment, "when she appointed you, I thought it was—" He stopped. "A mistake," Ethan said. "A personal decision dressed up as a professional one." Sims looked at him directly the way men look at each other when they're past the point of performing. "I was wrong." You were protecting your team, Ethan said. That's not wrong. That's what you were supposed to do. Sims was quiet for a moment. Then, she picked well, he said. Steele. Whatever her reasons were, she picked well. The elevator came. They rode down together without talking, and Ethan thought about the board meeting and the numbers in Hale's face when the documentation had already been in his assistant's inbox, and he thought about Lydia at the head of that table, still watching, waiting for the moment to say, "Walk us through it," not rescuing him, giving him the floor that was already his by right. He thought about what Emma had said in the car. She was scared. He thought so was I. He thought we're both still here. The elevator opened on the lobby, and the city came in through the glass doors. The ordinary ongoing noise of a summer afternoon, and Ethan Cole walked out into it, with the feeling of a man who had come a very long way from a parking lot in November and had arrived finally, and fully somewhere real. The authorization changed things at Meridian in ways that were immediate and visible. By September, the new routing system was fully integrated across all regional hubs. The manual reconciliation process, the one that had been costing 12 coordinators 4 hours a day for 18 months, was gone. Donna Reyes, who had handed Ethan a folder of documented failures on his first afternoon and asked without much hope whether anyone was actually going to read it, had been promoted to Director of Operations Technology, a title that Ethan had written into the org chart himself and that Lydia had approved in under 6 minutes. Garrett Sims, who had spent 11 years holding Meridian together with conviction and insufficient support, had stopped coming to the building with his arms crossed. He came now the way people come to places they've decided to believe in again. The quarterly loss that had been bleeding $4 million had by October reversed. Not dramatically. Not in the way that made for a triumphant board presentation with glossy graphics and an ovation. It reversed the way real things reversed steadily in increments, each small correction compounding on the last, until the cumulative change became undeniable. Ethan presented the numbers to the board in October, the same way he'd presented everything plainly sourced without theater. Victor Hale sat at the far end of the table and said nothing, which was Ethan had come to understand Hale's version of concession. After the meeting, Lydia walked with him to the elevator the way she sometimes did, when there was something she wanted to say outside of earshot of the conference room. They waited for the elevator in the particular comfortable quiet that had become the baseline of their time together, not the quiet of things unsaid, but the quiet of two people who had gotten past the need to fill space. "Hale wants to bring you onto the advisory board," she said. Ethan looked at her. "Hale." "Victor Hale, yes." She said it without satisfaction, though he knew she was feeling some. "He had his assistant call mine yesterday. Apparently, he'd like to discuss it at your earliest convenience." "He called me a flight risk in March," Ethan said. "He did. To my face. Also to 3 board members and apparently his wife, though I have that second hand." She glanced sideways at him. "He's not a bad man. He's a cautious one. Caution and intelligence don't always move at the same pace." "That's a generous reading." "I've had practice with generous readings," she said. "It's more efficient than being right and angry simultaneously." The elevator came. He held the door. "I'll think about the advisory board," he said. She stepped in. "You'll say yes," she said, not arrogantly, more like she was reading a document she'd already reviewed. "Because it's the right next step for Meridian, and you know it. And because you don't make decisions based on how people treated you before they knew you. You make them based on what the right thing is." She looked at him steadily. "That's one of the things I find most," she paused, choosing carefully, "stabilizing about you." The elevator doors closed. He stood in the hallway and felt the word settle, stabilizing, and understood that from Lydia Steele, who had spent years building walls against anything that moved her ground, it was not a small word. It was in her vocabulary close to essential. He said yes to the advisory board in November. The meeting where it was formalized fell on the 14th, which was, he realized only when he was already in the room, almost exactly 1 year from the gala, where he'd walked in alone and been mocked before he'd reached the coat check. He didn't mention this to anyone. But he held it quietly in the back of his mind throughout the meeting. The distance between that evening and this one, the territory crossed. Preston Hawke was not at this meeting. Preston Hawke had in the intervening year been quietly removed from 2 of the 3 boards he'd sat on, following a financial disclosure issue that Ethan had heard about through Lydia, with exactly as much comment as it deserved, which was none. Ethan signed the advisory agreement and shook Victor Hale's hand, and Hale's grip this time was different. Direct, unguarded, the grip of a man who had updated his information and was prepared to act accordingly. "I underestimated the appointment," Hale said, which was as close to an apology as a man like Hale was going to get, and Ethan recognized it as such and took it at full value. "You were protecting the company," Ethan said. "That's what you're supposed to do." It was almost exactly what he'd said to Sims in September. He meant it both times. Emma turned 10 in November. She had requested for her birthday a small dinner, not a party, those are inefficient, with specific guests, her grandmother from Pensacola, Mrs. Delgado from next door, and Lydia. Ethan had not suggested Lydia. Emma had put her on the list herself, with the same matter-of-fact inclusion she applied to anything she'd decided was simply true. He had called Lydia to extend the invitation, and there had been a pause on the other end of the line that he'd recognized, the kind of pause that meant something was larger than the speaker had prepared for. "She asked for me specifically," Lydia said. "She made the guest list herself. 3 people. Another pause. "What time?" 7, and she's going to quiz you on the book she's currently reading, so I'd read the back cover at minimum. "What's she reading?" "The Watsons Go to Birmingham." A short silence. Then, "I read that in 7th grade. I'll reread it." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." Her voice had that firmness he'd learned to recognize as her version of emotion, held inside precision. "I want to." The dinner was exactly what Emma had planned it to be. Not a party, not a performance. Just people who mattered in the same room eating food that Ethan had cooked, and that his mother declared with the authority of a woman who had fed him for 18 years was almost as good as hers. Mrs. Delgado brought flan. Emma presided over the table with the composed authority of a host who had thought about the seating arrangement. She had seated Lydia beside her. Ethan caught this and said nothing. His mother caught it too. He saw her register it, assess it, and decide over the course of about 3 seconds how she felt. He watched his mother watch Lydia through dinner with the particular careful attention of a woman who had raised a son through the worst years of his life, and was now deciding quietly and without announcement whether this was something she could let herself hope about. After the cake, which Emma had also specified chocolate, no fondant because fondant was primarily decorative and I find that dishonest, his mother found him in the kitchen. "She's good with Emma," his mother said, not a question. "Yeah," he said. Emma chose her seat. "I know." His mother was quiet for a moment, doing what she always did when she was about to say something she'd been holding for a while, setting down whatever she was holding so she could say it with her hands free. She set down her coffee cup. "Rachel would have liked her," she said. "She had no patience for small people, and she never had to pretend about things." She looked at him directly. "That's rare, Ethan." He held his mother's gaze. "I know it is." "Don't wait too long," she said. "Not as pressure, as permission. You've been careful for 4 years. Careful is good. But careful has a limit where it stops protecting you and starts just keeping things at a distance." She picked her cup back up. "I think you already know where that line is." He looked out through the kitchen doorway to the dining room where Lydia and Emma were deep in conversation about the Birmingham book, with the focused engagement of 2 people who had more in common than either of them had quite admitted yet. Emma was talking with her hands, which she did only when she was genuinely animated. Lydia was leaning forward, elbows on the table, the posture she used when she was fully present and not managing anything. "Yeah," he said softly. "I know where it is." He asked her in December. Not with a ring, not with a production. That was not who they were, either of them. He asked her on a Tuesday evening in early December at Hendrick's at the same corner table where they'd had coffee for the first time 11 months before. He had not planned a speech. He had thought about planning one and decided against it because anything he scripted would be a version of what he wanted to say rather than the actual thing, and the actual thing was what mattered. She arrived at 7:28, 2 minutes early, and she ordered black coffee and put her phone face down on the table. He waited until the coffee came. Then he said, "I want to talk about something." She looked at him. She read him the way she always did, quickly, completely. He watched her face move through assessment and land on a kind of stillness that was not calm so much as braced attention. "Okay," she said. "I've been thinking about what you said in October." He held her gaze. About stabilizing. What that word meant when you used it. She waited. "I think you said it because you've spent most of your life on ground that moved. Your father leaving, building the company on a foundation of one person who turned out to be Daniel Farrow, running everything yourself because it was safer than trusting a structure you hadn't built alone." He paused. "And I think you called me stabilizing, not because I'm static, but because I'm consistent. Because whatever I am today is what I'm going to be tomorrow. Because you've tested that enough times by now to believe it." She hadn't moved. Her coffee sat untouched. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's what I meant." "I want to keep being that," he said. "Not just adjacent to your life. Not just professionally connected and occasionally at your dinner table. I want to be in it. Fully. With you and with Emma, and with whatever this becomes." He stopped. "I'm not asking you to decide the future right now. I know you don't make statements you're not prepared to stand behind. I'm asking you whether the direction we're going is the one you want to be going in. Whether this, all of it, is what you choose." The coffee shop moved around them. The ordinary ambient Tuesday evening of other people's lives and other people's conversations. None of it touched this. Lydia looked at him for a long time. He had learned to let her silences complete themselves, and he let this one. It had weight, and it deserved the space. "I spent 10 years, she said finally, "building everything myself, because I believed that was the only version of safety that was real. Things you build yourself can't be taken away the same way, can't be undermined." She turned her cup slightly, the habit he'd catalogued a long time ago. "And then I walked across a ballroom because a man I didn't know was being made small by people who had no right to him, and I thought it was just the right thing to do." A moment. "And then you said you were glad you hadn't left, and I got in my truck and drove away, and—" She stopped. "I couldn't stop thinking about it. About you. About the way you looked at me like I was a person." She looked at him directly. "You have no idea how rare that is, to be looked at like you're just a person and not a category." "You are a person," he said. He had said it to her once before on a night that felt like a different life. She remembered. He could see that she remembered. "I choose this," she said. "You, Emma, the direction." She said it the way she said everything real plainly without flourish as a statement of documented fact. "I've been choosing it for a while. I just needed to hear you say it out loud." He reached across the table. She looked at his hand for a second, just a second, and then put hers in it, and it was not a small gesture for either of them. It was the physical form of a decision that had been made in pieces over 11 months, assembled from coffee cups and truck rides and board meetings and a 9-year-old on a park bench demanding to know about permanence. "Emma is going to say she knew," he said. Lydia's mouth curved. "Emma did know. Before either of us did. Considerably before." She tightened her hand in his, once briefly like a confirmation. "She told me in September." He blinked. "She told you." She said, and I'm quoting directly, "My dad doesn't iron shirts for no reason." A pause. "I told her I didn't know what to say to that. She said, 'You don't have to say anything. I just thought you should know he's serious.'" Lydia looked at him. She was looking out for you. He absorbed this. Emma at 10 years old having a private conversation with Lydia to make sure Lydia understood the weight of what she was holding. making sure that the woman entering their life knew that Ethan Cole's seriousness was real and deserved to be treated as real. Standing guard over her father's heart, the way he had always tried to stand guard over hers. He couldn't speak for a moment. He looked at his coffee cup. "She's remarkable," Lydia said softly. "Yeah." His voice came out unsteady in a way he didn't try to fix. "She is." Christmas that year was different. His mother came up from Pensacola. Mrs. Delgado brought tamales, which she brought every year, and which Ethan considered among the non-negotiable constants of his life. Lydia came with Emma's gift under one arm, a first edition of a book Emma had mentioned wanting once in passing 4 months ago, the kind of detail most adults forgot immediately, and Lydia had quietly filed and held, and a bottle of wine for Ethan's mother, and no performance of belonging, because she had stopped needing to perform it. Emma opened her gift and looked at Lydia with an expression of pure, unguarded delight that Ethan had not seen on his daughter's face, directed at anyone outside the family. She held the book in both hands carefully, the way she held things she intended to keep. Then she said, "You remembered." "I remember things," Lydia said. "So do I," Emma said. She looked at the book. Then she looked up. "Lydia." "Yes." "I'm glad Dad stayed at that party." Lydia looked at Emma for a long moment. The Christmas tree lights moved in the corner of the room, and the smell of tamales came from the kitchen, and Ethan's mother was saying something to Mrs. Delgado about the wine, and the ordinary, irreplaceable noise of a home full of people rose around all of them. "So am I, Emma," Lydia said. "More than I can tell you." Emma nodded, satisfied. She opened her book to the first page. That evening, after his mother had fallen asleep on the couch, and Mrs. Delgado had gone home, and Emma was in her room reading with the new book and the lamp on, Ethan stood at the kitchen counter with Lydia beside him washing the last of the dishes in the comfortable, unprominent way of two people who had been in the same kitchen enough times that the choreography of it had become natural. "Merry Christmas," she said, not looking up from the dish she was drying. "Merry Christmas," he said. They stood in the quiet of it for a moment. The apartment was warm. The tree was lit. Somewhere down the hall his daughter was reading by lamplight with a gift someone had remembered to give her, and his mother was breathing the slow, trusting breath of sleep in a house where she knew her son was okay. He thought about November, the year before. The dress uniform, and the pressed invitation, and Emma on the step-stool, telling him he looked distinguished. The parking lot of the ballroom, and the 2 minutes he'd spent deciding whether to go in. The laughter that started before he reached the coat check. He thought about a woman crossing a room with her spine straight, and her voice level, saying one word Preston, and the temperature dropping 10 degrees. He thought about the winter water clarity of her eyes when she'd looked at him and said, "You talk to me like I was a person." He thought about a truck parked by the harbor, and a broken air conditioner, and his daughter asleep under a library book, and a text at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night that said, "Saturday. I know a good park." He thought about all the distance between that man and this one, not the external distance, the title changes and the company turnaround and the advisory board, but the interior one. The distance between a man who had sealed himself against the future and a man who had learned slowly, and with help, to let the future back in. He handed Lydia the last dish. She took it, dried it, set it on the shelf. She turned off the faucet. They stood shoulder to shoulder in the quiet kitchen, and the tree threw its soft, steady light through the doorway. And somewhere down the hall, Emma turned a page. "What are you thinking about?" Lydia asked. "November," he said. "A year ago." She was quiet for a moment. "The gala. The parking lot before the gala." He paused. "I sat in my truck for 2 minutes, trying to decide whether to go in." "What made you go in?" "Emma told me to." He looked at her sideways. 11 words. "I never stood a chance." Lydia smiled, that full, unguarded smile, the one that changed everything about her face, and had been one of the first things he'd understood was worth protecting. She knew, Lydia said. Even then. She usually does. She turned slightly toward him. He turned toward her. Outside the kitchen window, the December night was clear and cold, and the city was lit up the way cities lit up at Christmas, warm and excessive, and completely indifferent to any particular story going on, as it always went on independent of the small essential things happening inside the lit-up windows. "I have something to tell you," Lydia said. He waited. "The Meridian Board voted yesterday." She held his gaze. "They want to expand the operational restructuring model. 3 more acquisitions in the pipeline. Similar situations, good bones failing management recoverable with the right approach." A pause. Victor Hale proposed naming the division, the restructuring practice. Another pause. He proposed calling it the Cole method. Ethan looked at her. "I didn't tell him to," she said. "He came to me. He said, and I'm quoting, 'The man walked in here and showed us what we'd been doing wrong for 3 years without ego, without politics, just the work. That deserves a name.'" She held his gaze steadily. "Victor Hale said that. About you." He was quiet. Not from surprise exactly. From the specific weight of being seen correctly by someone who had initially refused to see you at all, the particular fullness of that, the way it completed something. "I want to say something," he said. "Okay. A year ago I walked into a room full of people who thought I didn't belong there." He held her gaze. "And they were wrong. Not because of anything that's happened since. I belonged there the same way I belong anywhere because I showed up and I did the right thing, and I didn't let people make me smaller than I am." He paused. "But I almost let them. Not their laughter that never touched me. My own doubt. The part of me that had been alone so long, it had started to believe that alone was just who I was." He looked at her. "You didn't fix that. I want to be clear about that. You didn't rescue me. You saw me clearly at a moment when I needed to be seen, and it reminded me that being seen was possible." A beat. "Emma needed that from me too, and I'd been giving her the work of it, the logistics of being her father, the showing up, but not the full version. Not the version that included letting something new in." Lydia looked at him without speaking. Her eyes were clear and direct and entirely without the managed distance that had been her default when he first met her. "You changed that," he said. "Not by fixing me, just by being someone worth changing for." She reached up and put her hand against his face briefly, the kind of touch that said everything it needed to say and nothing extra. Then she lowered it. "Ethan Cole," she said quietly. "Yeah. You walked into that ballroom in a dress uniform, and you were the best person in the room." She said it simply as documented fact. "I knew it in the first 30 seconds. I just needed you to know it too." He looked at her for a long moment in the warm, quiet kitchen of the apartment where his daughter was reading and his mother was sleeping, and the Christmas lights burned steady in the next room. He had come a long way from the parking lot of that ballroom. From the man who had sat with the engine off holding an invitation he almost didn't accept, telling himself he didn't belong. He had come through grief and duty, and 4 years of solitude and a gala full of laughter that meant nothing, and one woman crossing a room who meant everything. He had come through board meetings, and broken air conditioners, and software systems, and a 9-year-old who had known the whole time, with her precise and undeceivable attention, exactly what was happening. He had come without quite noticing the moment it happened all the way home. "I know it now," he said. And that was the truth, final, whole, and entirely his own. The man who had walked in alone had not walked out that way. He had walked out into something that grew quietly and without announcement into the kind of life that does not announce itself with fanfare or dramatic reversal, but simply becomes one ordinary day at a time exactly what it was always supposed to be. Real. Chosen. Built by 2 people who had learned each in their own way and at their own cost that the walls they'd constructed were never the point, and that the only thing worth building in the end was something you could let someone else into. He had done that. They both had, and it held.